Good evening. My name is Vicki Sessoms, and I welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters. This is the second of a four-part series designed to raise awareness of the struggle for affordable housing. We express our thanks to Rabbi Sonia Starr of the Housing Alliance, Melody Taylor of HUD, and PACE for organizing the program. We have many attendees, so please put yourselves on mute. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat addressed to Sonia Starr. They will be addressed at the end of the session. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Vicki. I wanted to just start by giving us, just to kind of bring us up to this month from last month, to connect the two sessions. Because even though they're autonomous sessions, they are standalones in some way, there is a method to the madness, or at least we hope there is. In February's panel discussion, we really talked about the status of housing instability in Delaware. A broad picture of how dire the crisis is was painted for us. We discussed the lack of affordable housing, the precarious position of eviction court, and the need for more permanent solutions for people who are currently homeless. Participants heard the complex picture of generational poverty, systematic racism, NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and tenant described. Since then, the national low-income housing situation in Delaware has got low-income Delawareans to a shortage of 21,197 affordable and available safe units for extremely low-income Delawareans. We are going in the wrong direction. Tonight, what we're going to do is drill down into what all these concepts, numbers, and broad strokes mean to an individual person. We're going to give those statistics names and show how these concepts affect the everyday life of a human being. We're privileged to have two speakers who are experts by virtue of their life experiences. And both of these experts, these experts represent very different aspects of what it means to live on the edge. Not sure if you'll be sleeping inside, outside, in a shelter, in substandard housing, what it means to give housing instability a name, a face, and a voice. I would like to introduce each of them before they speak. You'll put your questions, as Vicki said, in the chat, and we'll have more of a robust discussion at the end. We're going to start with Dr. Devorah Gilbert-White. She's a social psychologist, diversity and inclusion specialist, social justice and community advocate for people experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, or formerly homeless. Dr. Gilbert-White provides a social psychological lens to the trauma experienced by individuals and families before, during, and after the experience of homelessness. Emerging issues such as stereotyping, group identities, criminalization, social power, and privilege inform her work. She's also the founder of Her Story Ensemble, LLC, an awareness, education, and advocacy community-based group focused on women and homelessness, and the Delaware Homes, Housing Opportunity, Mobility, Equity, Stability campaign. Her housing and homelessness advocate work connects with individual groups and organizations locally and nationally. And she is the author of Beyond Charity, a Sojourner's Reflection on Homelessness, Advocacy, Empowerment, and Hope. Her memoirs were released on September 2021. And Dr. Gilbert-White, it's a privilege to have you here tonight to share your story and your experience. And so with that, I want to turn it over to you to really personalize this for us, which I know is, and I should have said that in my intro, what we're asking of you, both of you tonight, is like the hardest thing to do, is to ask somebody to take some of the hardest, most difficult times in their lives and to share that with strangers. And yet when you do that, you give voice to something we don't always understand and thereby allow us to be better advocates. So I say thank you, and I turn the mic over to you.
And I thank you, Sonia, for saying what you just said, and also for the gracious invitation to be here with all of you this evening. yes, each time we tell our stories, we re-traumatize ourselves in some level, in some way. But it's important as advocates to tell our stories so that people can understand what we have been through and hear it from someone who has been through it. It is no secret that addressing the need for more affordable low income housing continues to be a major focus of housing and homelessness advocates. I know this because I am one of them and have seen and experienced what it feels like, what it looks like, and what can happen to you when you are facing housing insecurity because you can't afford to pay rent, because your income is too low as your increasing rent becomes too high. For some, it means staying in housing that is unsafe and unsanitary because you simply can't afford to move. The affordability factor not only translates to the cost of monthly rents, but also to the various hoops people are asked to jump through beyond having a security deposit. Sometimes people are required to provide multiple times the monthly rent to secure housing. At the end of the day, the situation not only speaks to the lack of the number of units available for people making minimum wage, but also to the policies and practices that limit accessibility. I get it. We live in a capitalistic society, but at what point do we say enough is enough? About what most of us know, the cost of living is too high. Currently, I live in DC. Rents are high. I have met people making more than minimum wage who have living arrangements that help ensure that they keep a roof over their heads. They live with multiple roommates to make the rent. Many of us know that to afford housing, we do not have enough income to pay for housing on our own one paycheck. If we are not the one working a second job, someone in our household is, or we are members of households where everyone must contribute to the rent. The experience of being underemployed and not having enough income living in Delaware brought to the forefront for me the decisions that people identify as the working poor, senior citizens on fixed incomes, and people experiencing trauma are forced to make. You decide what bills you can pay, even if it's partial payment, whether or not you can afford to buy your medication, and look for ways to stretch your limited income by visiting food pantries. I did it all. You choose what things you need to let go because they are not essential, like cable, or buying new clothes, or spending on social activities. You make do with what you have. You are in consistent survival mode. For me, trying to sustain my one bedroom apartment in Newcastle, Delaware was a monthly challenge as I struggled to find work that would pay me enough to pay the rent and to keep my housing. Not being able to afford my housing would eventually lead to eviction. And that eviction was my pathway to homelessness. Coming through the experience of homelessness fuels my advocacy work locally and nationally. However, it began with me opening my mouth to share what was happening and had happened to me as someone who had struggled to keep housing with an advanced degree. So I share my story because of the letters in front of my name and behind my name, because it is not about them and othering people who struggle, but it really is about us and what we can do to support each other's humanity. As a person with the lived experience of housing insecurity and homelessness, and with an understanding of what it means to constantly be in a position of wondering how I would have enough money to pay rent, I see the connection between housing, having a living or housing wage, homeless prevention, and poverty. Having and building more affordable low income, safe, and secure housing, and the fight for a living or housing wage is basic homeless prevention 101. We must ask ourselves, in what ways are we moving beyond the talk of addressing Delaware's affordable housing crisis that supports housing as a human right and less of a commodity? And in which ways are we an extension of the problem or a component of the solution? We, each of us, are challenged individually and collectively this day and every day to not only meet the immediate needs of people struggling to find and keep housing they can afford, but to explore how Delaware as a state and the United States as a country, with all its resources, can reimagine the systems, policies, and practices that provide housing and make it affordable for all and to keep people housed. As I ponder what more can be done to address the housing crisis, I am reminded of something that I heard HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge say in her response to that question. Secretary Fudge said, "Get into policy, make it right." So we must promote the importance of knowing and understanding national, state, and local policies and legislation that prevent the development of multi-unit, low-income, and public housing in neighborhoods. We must recognize the growing number of people who are senior citizens who cannot afford the high property taxes on homes they have lived in for decades and are now at risk. Policy is about who gets what, where, and why. My experience helps me realize that the things and issues that are important to us have policies and legislation protecting them. Secretary Fudge basically shared that we must become a nation, states, and local communities that care about its people and embraces housing as a human right. None of this policy and legislative change work can happen without having policymakers and legislators who understand the issues before them and have the will to do something different. In my advocacy work in Delaware, I remain hopeful because I know a few of them and I know how hard they are working to make it right. The question now becomes for some of us, what more do we need to see? What more do we need to hear or know to begin doing what will make it right? How can we ensure that everyone has decent, affordable, secure, supportive housing to live in? Currently, I consult with HUD as a member of their lived experience team. In this capacity, I provide insight from the experiential knowledge gained navigating trying to keep housing and eventually losing it. The voices of people with lived experience are key to bringing about transformative change by bringing the human element to the numbers or data we often utilize. We humanize what the numbers tell us, knowing that for each stat represents individuals and families that can live fully into the potential for their lives, supported with housing that is affordable. I did not know years ago when I hit a rough patch concerning housing that the journey would lead to lifting and having a voice for transformative change. As we work to make affordable low-income housing a reality for the many who desperately need it in Delaware, I end my time with an excerpt from my book, The Young Charity, a sojourner's reflections on homelessness, advocacy, empowerment, and hope. This is from chapter 7, titled Reflections. Shortly after coming out of homelessness, I was asked, would you have the same energy for the issue if you had not been homeless? The question caused me at the time to reflect on the path I had taken, to where I then found myself as a community advocate on the issue. The seed for advocacy work connected to people experiencing homelessness was planted years before I experienced it. My professional training and work were associated with diversity and inclusion, and the exploration of social power and privilege, the making of in-groups and out-groups, the role of perceptions, stereotypes, and stigma in human relationships. Each of the aforementioned connected to the issue of homelessness and to people identified as homeless. I could answer the question honestly, yes, understanding that inequity and injustice need to be addressed in whatever form it presented itself. And I say, as we continue to look at housing issues and crisis in Delaware, that we have to address it and look at it through the lens of inequities and justice. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll come back with some more questions after we hear what Ms. Benson has to share with you, but I really appreciate you sharing your experience and your wisdom. As they say, wisdom born of pain, but wisdom nonetheless, and it enlightens and helps us all, so thank you. Ms. Loretta Benson is a longtime resident of Sussex County and an avid community organizer and activist. She serves as the president of Ellendale Community Civic Association and has organized, advocated, and negotiated in the fight for clean drinking water for the residents of Ellendale. Loretta's work is not done. She's now fighting for residents to have safe, decent, and sanitary, affordable housing opportunities for the New Hope community. She also serves as the chair of the 36th District of Sussex County, has worked for Sussex County government for the past 28 years. At this time, it is a privilege to turn it over to you, Ms. Benson, and you tell me when you want me to start sharing my screen. You want me to start at the beginning?
Yes, I just wanted to be brief with some things that I just wanted to share. Maybe some that have not. Okay. Okay. First, I just want to say good evening. Thank you for having me on tonight. I just wanted to be brief a little bit, just kind of tell you a little more about me. I'm the president of the Ellendale Community Association. I'm here to raise awareness and with the hope that this group will join me and others in addressing the unsanitary, unhabitable living conditions, the landlord tactics, the residents of Ellendale, New Hope, and continue to suffer for the past many years, many years. The landlord record, Jacqueline Hickman, in some instance, investments have been forcing their tenants to live in horrendous conditions for years without having to make fixes, pay fines, nor accommodate residents, some of which have children with disabilities. To give some context on about 2015, HUD convened members from Ellendale, Sussex Constables Housing Division and invited members from Sussex County to address the contaminated water conditions. During that time, the housing conditions were also raised and the members of the Ellendale community sought to have the units condemned. Tenants are paying up to $700 per month to live in unhabitable conditions. It is alleged that the rents is going up to be raised up to $1,000 per month. One tenant in particular who has a disabled child was issued an eviction notice. Many are living without heat and hot water, and in some instances, no water at all. Open sewage backing up in the units. So I just wanted to share this this PowerPoint that I have to show how some of a lot of the folks in New Hope are living. The conditions are really bad.
You want to keep going or you want me to stop here?
Yes, you can keep going. There should be some pictures. There's just some, go ahead. That's just showed just, the area, where New Hope is, where the homes are in Ellendale, if anyone is not familiar where these homes are at. Go ahead. It might have went a little too far.
Yeah, go.
Okay, go ahead. Those are just some issues we're just talking about as far as the slumlord. Okay, so this, if you can see this house, this particular trailer that I was dealing with one tenant, she's no longer in this trailer. This is what she was living in, and this is where the landlord would not fix anything. And this is how she was living. She had several kids. She has, in this place, it had broken panels, rotten mold, the flooring. You can keep moving. There should be some more. This is the ceiling. And I think this is a closet where this young lady was living in this particular unit that just Jackie Hickman would not fix. So there's the kitchen sink where the water was backing up. There's the bathroom where you can see how that looks, where she was living with children. This is the back. You can see where the back of the trailer is. This is where this young lady was living with her 3 children. And then on the side, you can see where all the water was flooding, coming from underneath of the trailer where she was living. Then to your right, you will see the mouse. Look more like rats to me. This is the conditions that this young lady was living in, and I'm sure it's plenty more out there where these homes are at in New Hope and Ellendale on Old State Road, where this young lady was living. So my solutions and comments for you guys, that's just some of them. We have plenty more pictures that that can be shown, but that's just some of them where the tenants are living in the conditions that they're living in New Hope. Is my hope is for you guys to get on board with me and other ones to do something about this landlord that's living in, that as a landlord that's been doing this for many years, taking the rent from these tenants and not fixing up anything, not having clean drinking water. Of course, they have clean drinking water now. They have the sewer as well, but the situation is just not getting any better because she's evicting people because they won't pay the rent that she wants them to pay. So there is a couple of them that is going to be going to court here shortly. But like I said, this situation has been going on for quite some time. And when I go to sleep at night, this is on my mind constantly throughout the day, throughout the night. And there's times where I've cried because I said, where I live, I can go home at night when I come home from my job and have a clean house to live in and not have to worry about these rats or mouse running around. But these tenants, this is the kind of conditions that these tenants are living in, and something has to be done. First of all, get the landlord out there, and then 2, get the housing situation under control so they can live, in better housing. Because right now it's a battle. So this is all I have to say. I'm hoping that everyone can get on board with us. We've been fighting for a long time. I mean, a very, very long time. And we cannot continue to not see anything done.
I
So
appreciate. Thank you, Ms. Benson. Those pictures paint 1,000 words. They're more potent and powerful than any of us can imagine with words. There are 2 questions that are similar in the chat for you, and then another one for Dr. Gilbert White. But let me start here. Are there not legal requirements for landlords? And the other is, are there no regulations or laws in Delaware that protect tenants? They're really the same question, but the flip of each. Why is it that these kinds of conditions are allowed to continue to exist? Are there no laws that protect tenants from this kind of living situation? And I think that's for you, Ms. Benson.
As far as I can, I don't believe there are any type of laws, as far as, to regulate as far as the landlord, because she's been getting away with this for many years. I mean, we've had probably maybe 10, 15 years ago, about 5 tenants. They got evicted. They went to court. They showed all these pictures and everything to the judge. They sided with her. So there isn't any laws right now, to get this woman out of where she is, because she keeps getting away with it and nothing's being done about it.
Your
So
Honor,
I think that one of the things to be careful about, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Ms. Taylor, feel free to come on and take yourself off chat. Maybe we can make you a co-host if you have some insight from HUD's perspective that might be helpful. I think that sometimes there's a difference between what the law says and what the enforcement is of that law. It is illegal to have sewage running
Right.
around your place. It's illegal to be rented to with no water, sewage backing up in your sink and not be fixed
Yeah.
and your toilet's not working. That is illegal. The question is whether those laws are being enforced and if they're being enforced equally throughout the state in all of our neighborhoods, or only in particular neighborhoods with particular kinds of residents that live in them.
Mhm.
But, can you let Melody unmute herself, please?
She should be able to now.
Try doing it now, Melody.
No, I'm gonna,
She
Sorry.
should be made a co-host. We want to hear what you have to say, I promise.
And while you're trying to get her on, I'm just going to kind of piggyback a little bit,
Go
just to
ahead.
say that DNREC and all these state agencies, they are aware of this. They've been notified, so they do know about this, but nothing has been done. That's what nothing hasn't really been done. I mean, they're aware of all of this. I mean, I know they're not going back there with their eyes closed. I know they can't be. They're not going back there blindfolded.
Right.
My
Go ahead, Ms.
question
Taylor.
is, has there been an attempt to speak with the people at an organization called Community Legal Aid? That is a nonprofit in Delaware that handles exactly these type of problems? Has somebody contacted them? Do you know?
So why
Well,
don't you
there-
let Ms. Taylor
ahead.
speak for a second? Go
I was
ahead.
going to say hi and good evening, everyone. So yes, Community Legal Aid Society, several years ago, was brought into this conversation. It was truly an effort to connect the dots. In the state of Delaware, right, many of the organizations operate in silo. And so the notion of being able to connect people to services to then connect them to housing has not happened successfully. It just has not happened successfully. And so several years ago, as Loretta stated, HUD and DOJ, the Attorney General's office, Sussex County, we pulled in your city council members and had a forum and a discussion about this particular community and why at that point they had gone for over 50 years without clean water. The water conditions in Ellendale that you just saw were how many of the residents were living with sewage seeping through their property. There's a high incident rate of cancer that because of the nitrate levels that happen in that community and many other communities. There are 26 unincorporated communities in Sussex County that exist with living conditions that are similar to this, right? And this particular property is, the land itself is owned and the landlord owns the trailers on the property. So she doesn't own the land, she owns the trailers. The county does have laws in place to condemn these units. The problem is is that we're faced with condemnation and homelessness, right? That is the challenge here, that people have to make the choice to live in such deplorable conditions versus having somewhere safe, decent, and affordable to live. And that option doesn't exist. We've been having this conversation for a very long time. We even engaged the constable's office to do just that, think about condemning the units. And several years ago when we had this conversation, one of the tenants was courageous enough to go through the process, but she was displaced, right? So her children could no longer go to the schools that they were attending. She no longer could work in the same community, could no longer go to her church, could no longer, associate with her family because she had to move to another state, right? Because there was no affordable housing there. And that is truly what we're faced with, being able to, or to make decisions around living in conditions such as versus being homeless. That's what people are faced with.
I also want to suggest, and I'll let any one of our panelists jump in if this isn't completely correct, but I know that there have been times, not when I've been homeless, but when I've been in crisis. And when you're waking up every morning just trying to figure out how to get through the day, trying to figure out how to do your job, how to take care of those people that are dependent on you, and do all of the agencies that are necessary, and trying to get the money to work and shop and do laundry and to get your kids to school and all the other pieces, it's not the time when you can do all the research to figure all of this stuff out. And it ends up being like a research project, which is easy to say when you're in a healthy, safe spot, go and do a research project. But when you're in crisis, it's not so easy to be able to put all of those pieces all together. And I think sometimes the question is almost a question of our privilege, that we get to think about who has the space to think about how many calls you have to make to get to the right person, to find the right person that might even listen to you, who might know the right person, who might be able to maybe help you.
Right. And
So
Sonia,
that's-
as you're talking,
Go
as
ahead.
you're speaking, I'm just thinking, first of all, my heart is broken from what the pictures we saw and what's just been explained, that this is happening here, in the United States, in the state of Delaware. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And I think what has come to my mind is what you said, Sonia. People are so busy trying to survive, trying to make it from day to day, to cross the T's and dot the I's. And that's why some of the work that we've been doing is getting people to help people navigate the systems that they need to navigate. That's something that HUD has been looking at and practicing in some places, where you have someone that takes you through the system, connects you with different people that can give you the answers that you need. But I think for it to even get to this point, I don't even understand how we got to that point, that the women and children are living, in squalor.
So
It's
you
just-
should know that they're paying money out of pocket. These are not HUD funded properties,
Mhm.
right? These are hardworking, earned dollars that people are making day to day, and they're paying to a landlord. So there's no subsidy tied to these properties at all. So if subsidies were tied to this property, obviously HUD would be able to intervene in a way or differently, for sure.
Yes.
Because there are no subsidies tied to the property, our intervention doesn't avail itself. So we've attempted to figure out if this is a fair housing issue, right? And tie it to affordable housing. And so we're exploring some, solutions. As Mr. Butzeit, if I'm pronouncing your name properly, suggested working with Classy. And so there are some, again, courageous tenants who are willing to step up, and Classy is working in tandem with them. Not much more I could say relating to their particular case, but Classy is working in tandem with them. Things that we talked about several years ago were creating some place-based strategies. So thinking about how to look at this community and connecting it with the various services that are needed in order to assist the residents. I mean, you know, when you think about landlord who for years have allowed people to live in these conditions, you don't want to find ways or means to support that person, right? But in this particular circumstance, minus having housing for them to live in, the alternative would be to create housing opportunities within that community. And I don't, you know, based on what you saw, it's real. So if you haven't, you know, I've driven, I've been in the neighborhood. You know, these are not even units to me that could even be rehabbed to allow them to be habitable. And so there truly is a need for a different strategy to be put in place to assist these residents, especially when you drive through and you see children, right? Outside, you see children in the windows of these trailers and these units. And you know that this is what they have to wake up to and to go to sleep in at night. You know, the water issues, meaning the water in their units, oftentimes is not running, right? The electricity, there have been accounts where tenants have been hooked up to each other's electric opportunities to even have electricity and things of that nature and heat. And I put in the chat the county standard code or substandard housing and condemnation language. Everything about these units suggests that they should be condemned, right? Without fail. However, you know, if as a collective, as a movement, as a you know, a call to action to condemn these units means finding housing for these individuals. And we heard last week, we heard the executive director of the Housing Authority say that they have a wait list for 14,000 people, right? So the notion that an individual could even get a subsidy is nil to none. So where do people live? And that's the true question. And that is really the basis of this conversation about affordable housing. And I hope that at the end of this conversation and at the end of this series, that we truly put pen to paper and think about a strategic way that we can create some affordable housing throughout the state of Delaware, but in particular in Sussex County.
So, thank you. And I appreciate all of you jumping in to help explain all of this process. There's a couple questions. I want to switch a little bit to Dr. Gilbert White's story a little bit, because I think in some ways the questions are related. I think the questions that you might help us understand, Dr. Gilbert White, is what is somebody in that moment of being faced with or being homeless, what's going on internally, which in some warped way ends up having them survive in a place that most of us wouldn't even walk down the street in, right? And so I want to turn it back to you. And one of the questions that was asked, you mentioned having to live with multiple families or individuals. We often call it doubling up or tripling up. Couch surfing is another way we put it in the field. Having experienced that, what does that affect on you as a person to have to live in those kind of situations? Not by choice, you know, some people choose to have an intergenerational family, but because it was the only way to pay the rent. What was that like for you?
Well, I did not have to do that in my particular instance. I shared that as information I had from people that I had connected with. But in my experience in homelessness in Delaware, when I was evicted from my apartment, I moved in with my brother who lived in Newark. And so I slept on his couch for about 90 days until I could get a bed at a shelter. And so having, having to know that you're going to be out of housing, that you don't have a place to live, and giving away your things, I put an ad on Craigslist and had people coming to my apartment to take away the things that I had, had brought in and gathered, throughout my whole life as a professional. my books library, my, different things that I had acquired because I had a life before homelessness and I had a life before the struggle of trying to keep housing. And so it makes you um, look at yourself, to see, well, I did this, I did that. This is what they said should happen because I did A, B, and C. But then you're experiencing something that's completely different that people would not think that someone with advanced degree would be homeless. But I've come to realize that my situation is not that unique. The thing that makes my situation a little different is that I'm willing to talk about it. So I had to work through all that eternal stuff of, what people going to think, and they think this and they think that about me, and I should be doing this and I shouldn't be doing that, but yet I don't have housing. So I had to unpack all of those messages and all of those ideas about what I needed to do in order to survive, in order to move past it. And that helped me to become an advocate for myself.
And one of the other questions was when you were homeless, what was the particular service or person or what shook you out of it? What was that thing that made that transition to housing stability for you?
I pulled my pension.
Wow.
I pulled my pension and I lived off my pension for a whole year.
Right.
I had to pull my pension. I turned 55 in the shelter. The week that I was in the shelter, I went into the shelter on a Tuesday. That Saturday, I turned 55 years old. Years leading up to that, I had been planning to pull my pension to buy a townhouse or condo. Now I had to pull my pension to survive. And so I knew that the situation that I was in was one that needed to be told because it was not only homelessness happens to this person, that person. It was an economic situation. I had been downsized and I could not find work in time. I could not find work in time to keep my apartment. So yes, that's what happened. I had a pension and I pulled it to live.
Which means you don't have it anymore. Right.
Well,
Or if you
I
have
don't
it, you
have
have it something you started after the fact.
right.
Right.
I
But
don't
that,
have as much of it anymore.
right, right. So therefore, why do we have people who are seniors now becoming homeless? Is because instead of saving for retirement, instead of being able to prepare for retirement, they're living from hand to mouth and or doing things like you had to do to pull their pension, right? Instead of being able to save for being a senior on a fixed
Mm.
income,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that one of the questions was a very concrete question, just going back to Miss Benson's, was about the owning of the land. And if who really asking the question of who owns the land if the person in the trailer doesn't own the land, and how does that work? How do you have a landlord that doesn't own the land? I don't think everybody quite understands manufactured housing. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to explain that process a little bit more to us.
Well, the land that the individual, she owns mostly all the trailers back there. I do know that she owns mostly all the trailers back there, and I do think she owns a few of the land back there because it's under Fitzgerald's or whatever. I'm just throwing it out there. So that's the name of the development. I guess I'm answering a question, but she owns several of those trailers back there and some of the land. She does own some, but not all of them back there.
Right. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about manufactured housing is that you ultimately you don't always, you can have two landlords. Right, because the
Mhm.
person who owns the land can be renting to the person that owns the trailer.
That
who
is
can be
correct.
renting to the person that's the tenant, right?
That's
So,
correct.
and in this particular landlord, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is there are two different situations depending on which trailer is. Some places she owns
Right.
both the land and the trailer, and in other places she
That's
does not own the land, but she does own the trailer,
that's
right? Is
correct.
that correct? Right.
That's correct.
So
Mhm.
manufactured housing creates a whole other kind of situation than we're used to if we're in regular, I don't know what you call, what's the opposite of manufactured housing? When you're in housing, brick and mortar housing, right? Because we're used to the same person who owns an apartment building owns the land. That's not always the case in manufactured housing,
That is correct.
right?
And so I dropped into the chat also, there's a Manufactured Homeowners Act, which is governed by the Attorney General's office, in fact. And essentially, there are requirements, right? That again, housing should be safe and decent and habitable. And in this act, it provides standards for such. Um, it also provides a process for, again, condemnation of those properties. But the Attorney General's office, again, that we engaged several years ago, have some awareness of this. Again, I think the more voices behind this, the more strategic that coalition building can happen, organizations align. I think the greater opportunities for affordable housing to be a priority throughout the state.
Thank you. This next question, I'm gonna take a first step of it, but I really want to hear everybody's answer to it because we all might have a slightly different answer. And I want to encourage people to come in May because I think that's really when we get a good answer for this. But if you had to design low-income subsidized housing to allow people to have a home as a right, what would that design look like? And I want to just focus on the word is housing as a right. In the United States, housing is not a right, right? And we might say we think it should be a right. I preach for my whole career, previous life, that it should be, I just assumed it was right. In the United Nations, our international law, it is a right. But our laws in the United States do not make it a right. Because if it did, we would mandate that people had safe and affordable housing. There would have to be, just like school is a right. Because if it isn't, you have public schools that pay for it, right? Food is a right. We give you SNAP cards, whatever they are nowadays. They used to be food stamps. You get something from the government that says it has to be. We don't have it that you have to have housing in the United States, not yet. But I'm open to hearing what other people have to say as well.
Mm.
Ms. Gilbert White or Ms. Benson
Okay.
or Ms.
Oh, I
Taylor?
could just open it up to everyone. Okay.
No, I'm at
Um,
you. I
yeah,
apologize.
yeah, no problem. I believe that it goes back to us being a capitalistic society. And so, there's profit in having housing that you can get top dollar for. There's also profit in creating industries that support people who may not have housing, which I talk about, in my book about the homeless industrial complex. How much many of the people and the groups that are working on these issues oftentimes are perpetuating it because there's not a way, they're not looking at a way to end it, we're looking at a way to manage it. And so if we're looking at just managing, house people who are experiencing homelessness and managing, the lack of affordable housing, then we're not looking at ways to connect, as Ms. Taylor has spoken earlier, about connecting and finding new ways and in reimagining new ways that we can get what people need. And so it means, that we have to do things differently. We have to reimagine relationships. We have to reimagine how we look at people who are poor in this country, people identified as poor, people identified as working poor. We got to begin to really be honest about how we see this. And people experiencing homelessness, the stereotypes and the myths about who's homeless, continue to point to certain things and not to lift up that this could happen to anybody. And I say it happened to me, it can happen to anybody. So we need to begin to look at how do we look at the policies and the legislation and the practices that we have in place that keep people poor, that keep people, in certain places and positions and does not allow for us to really look at doing things in a more transformative way. We got to break the status quo.
Mhm.
Another question for one of the two of you is, how can we make the greater Delawarean community aware of the housing homelessness problem?
I will say that we need to have a, well, might not be the right thing to say at this point, but I feel like, you know, having like where Ellendale, New Hope is, have the media come to where where they're living and have a protest out there, right at the, right out there, make people aware of what's going on. I mean, because some people may know and some people may not know, but that could be another way to get it on the news, get it out there to show that, that this landlord is doing what she's doing back there to the tenants.
Mhm.
Because right now the tenants, they're afraid, to even say anything because afraid of getting kicked out of where they're staying at. I mean, there may be a few that may speak up, but the rest, they're afraid to say anything because they may get evicted if they get on board with the rest of the tenants. So making people aware everywhere about what's going on, I think that would bring some clarity to what's going on, let them know what's going on back there.
Yeah, and I would agree with you with that, as well as also helping people to feel empowered to do something for ourselves. I think having this discussion, utilizing people with lived experience is important, but also knowing what's out there as far as legislation. I believe, as I said before, that we protect what we want and what we protect. We have legislation and policy to protect it. We have been fighting for a homeless bill of rights for the state of Delaware since 2012, and it's an anti-discrimination bill. It simply says people should not be treated differently because of their housing status. And the situation that you were explaining, Loretta, is people's housing status. They're being treated differently. They're not seen as people. They're not seen as people who need to have the things corrected that need to be corrected, and they seem to be looked at as being voiceless. But we know that they're not voiceless. But what do we do to make sure that they are empowered, that people are empowered to have what they need?
So
And
one of, oh, go
and
ahead,
to
I'm
just
sorry.
and to just piggyback on what you're saying, they do have a voice. And they need to, I think one of the things is they want to feel like they can trust us,
Yeah.
that something is going to be done and not worry about if they're not going to have a place to stay. Because right now the situation is it's just not good. It really isn't good at all. I've never experienced homelessness, but I've seen this and I've continued to see it. But if I was in that situation, oh my.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been trying to do with panel discussions like this and other processes is lift up that voice, right? One of the things that happens is when you have privilege, you have a voice. And when you don't have privilege, whether that's racial, economic, gender, however you define privilege in that moment, right? Then you don't have a voice. You don't have access to the media. You don't have access to publicity. You don't have access to things. And yet if we don't hear from people, then it's as if they don't exist. And so we've been trying to figure out different ways. That was part of what was behind this panel discussion. But another way I'd like to share my screen is what Housing Alliance created, is what we hope is only the beginning, which is our virtual lived experience library. So if you go to our website and you go to publications and resources, can you all see the lived experience library, which now is a white screen? Where did my library go? Oh, not good. I will not be a happy camper. Where did my library go? Hold on. Try that again. There we go. My lived experience library. Can you all see that?
Mhm.
So these are clips of people who have given us their permission to tell us their story. And they're all between 3 to 5 minutes long, all different kinds of experiences. Experiences with being homeless as children, experiences with being eviction, experiences even with being affordable housing landlords, experiences with being homeless and what that experience was like. 1 out of 3 people in Delaware who is homeless is under the age of 18. And so I wanted to just offer another voice to this panel, is to share with you this voice of Ms. Cheyenne Miller. Ms. Cheyenne Miller is a wonderful advocate in her own right, and was homeless as a high school student. And just a short clip, 3 minutes long, I want to share with you her experience of what it was like to be homeless and in high school.
Did you feel as though the school system supported you?
Okay, no, the school system did not support me when I was homeless. Like I said, I got in a detention, like, so, nah. And I think back to what you said about like the question of, did I get support? I think like I said, like it was true, like total silence. There was no question about the change in my behavior. Like there were days where I had bad days, so I had an attitude. I remember sitting in a math class one day and the teacher was like asking me something, and I might have made like a really flippant comment back to whatever she was asking about. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember like I knew I was getting smart with her and she knew I was getting smart with her. And it was completely out of character for me, like to be sitting in that class. I hated math, but I didn't get smart with my teacher. And like, I remember her being like mean to me about it, like angry with me about it. Like she didn't even ask the question. I look back now and I asked, like, if it was me and I was with a person and I knew them pretty well and I'd be like, yeah, she doesn't normally act like that, I would have been like, yo, what's up with you? You good? Like, are you okay? You know? And that never happened in that math class. And no one like asked me why I was late. Like they just like, it was like that zero tolerance. You can't be late to school 3 times. So it wasn't like someone came to me and said, you've never had a late before. You're not usually in detention. What's going on that you did that? Like now that I do housing advocacy, those types of things are like front of mind for me because I know I can go to a school and like you could talk to whoever it is that deals with McKinney-Vento and they'll probably know like some telltale signs where like, this first person's probably not acting right, so we should ask the question. Or maybe this person's been coming in with the same clothes for the last 3 days and we should ask the question of like, are you experiencing homelessness? But the school didn't even ask that. And I mean, this was like, I went to school between 2005, 2009, like pretty sure McKinney-Vento was there, like to provide me with like some type of support legally, but the school didn't do that. And I got like pissed off about it. Like often, like I get really mad about it because like, fuck was you there for? If you were a school and you couldn't even ask like one student who was like a good student, regardless if I was, because I could have been a bad student, you still should have asked. But like I was a good student and you guys didn't even notice like I was a good student that was having like a problem and you didn't even reach out to ask. Like that like actually pisses me off. Like I get angry about it. So
There's all kinds of clips like that throughout the website. What it's like to be homeless, what it's like to have people walk by and ignore you, not make eye contact, be mean to you, what it's like to have somebody actually be kind and helpful to you. So feel free to check it out. If you happen to have other clips that we were hoping that this will someday become like a library with a whole bunch of clips from all kinds of places. We're happy to put up your clips. We're also happy to link to your website. So feel free just to let me know. There's some questions that came in the chat. So let me go to them. If people know where would these people go? Are we looking at more public housing, big apartment buildings, something temporary like the Pallet Village, government owned? What are we looking at for a solution? Anyone? Well, while you're thinking about, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna jump in, again, you think one community at a time, right? And I think this community, we've definitely over the course of years attempted to tackle, the best path forward. Again, I think a place-based initiative, so bringing back to the table all those who were at the table before. And so your Attorney General's office, Sussex County, and others, and really think through strategically where people can be placed and how housing can be developed. We're building housing throughout this state in rapid form. Why don't we have any inclusionary zoning strategies that will allow for affordable housing to be built in some of these communities that are being established, right? So it's not that we can't, it's that we haven't. And so I think there has to be greater strategies around getting city council and others to align with affordable housing strategies. The state has a document which is called an analysis of impediments. And it's on the website. It's called the AI 2020 or 2021. And it gives a host of recommendations for affordable housing strategies that could be adopted. It requires citizens like everyone on this call to pull that document out and to start socializing and having conversations around those strategies that could work in the community.
Mhm.
Dr. Gilbert White, you wanted to say something, right?
Yeah, I just was trying to unmute, but I wanted to say that we need affordable, low-income permanent housing. I think that is another way of really starting to break the cycle of not having enough housing. It has to be permanent housing. We are meeting the needs, immediate needs, with temporary sometimes, but when we have permanent housing, we are setting people up for better success. And so if we can, people who are working on the issue of development, as it was said, it's not a problem with housing. People have housing. It's just not affordable. It's not low cost affordable, and there's not enough units. And so it's not that we don't have the housing, that we don't have housing. It's that there's not the will to have the housing that we need.
There's also land trust models. I think that many of you are probably familiar with Diamond State Community Land Trust. Their mission and goal was to create affordable long-term housing so that people could gain access to home ownership, quite frankly. So they sought to build in the Sussex County area. Their plan was denied. But again, land trust models where the way that Sussex County has operated and many parts of the state, right, where manufactured homes are, the land is owned by someone else. With land trust models, it allows for the affordable housing to be purchased. So the equity goes to the homeowner who's purchasing the home. There's a land lease. Usually 99 years, and then some land leases say to perpetuity, but it's designed to purchase land to allow for affordable housing to be built, so that low-income persons have access to home ownership and they can transfer generational wealth. So again, I think there are models that the state can tap into. This has happened in other parts of the country. It's a matter of figuring out what the right strategy is, and then really, again, implementing those strategies to benefit the residents of the communities.
And I'm not sure it's one solution fits all. It's not one size fits all. This is not a soundbite solution. This isn't something that in X number of characters, we're going to find a solution. This is going to be something that is really a complicated, nuanced solution that's going to require people doing a lot of different things in a lot of different places in order to get it right. And that's really what our panel discussion in May is about. There's a whole lot of issues about systematic racism that has to be tackled and addressed. There's a whole lot of systematic economic prejudice that has to be really tackled and addressed, and there's a lack of housing that needs to be tackled and addressed. There's zoning issues that need to be tackled. There's a lack of eviction protection and eviction rights for tenants. There's a whole complicated mess of things that need to be really taken seriously, but unless we get out of the world of sound bites and really get into a nuanced discussion, we won't be able to solve any of this because it is so complex and so necessary at the same time. There is another question in the chat that asked if the town of Georgetown states that the town of Georgetown adopted ordinance for rental properties. Inspections will be completed in 2023 to 2024. Certain criteria for units must be met. Additionally, Sussex County is undergoing property assessment. How would the latter, the Sussex County's property assessment affect New Hope of Ellendale? Will it affect it at all? Does somebody know the answer to that? I don't. No. Okay, well, that's something we need to look in. Go ahead, Ms. Sue. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You gotta, can you let Sue unmute herself? Go ahead.
Thank you. Am I correct in understanding that Ellendale is a incorporated community? Incorporated town?
Melody, unmute yourself.
Sure, they're unincorporated.
Oh, it is, because whatever the town of Georgetown does would not affect the town or the hamlet of Ellendale. It's regulated by the Sussex County if it's not an incorporated town, unless the person who wrote Cheryl Biddle said the town of Georgetown adopted ordinances for rental property, but it wouldn't affect Ellendale.
So Sonia would argue that we need a state-based inspection of all rentals that goes by HUD's inspection rules. A, they're stricter than anything we have in Delaware anywhere, and B, then all the landlords would automatically be able to take vouchers. But that would be a solution that would help. It would be mandatory inspections on a regular basis, and it would be based on voucher acceptance. But that unfortunately does not exist right now in Delaware. Other questions? Any other questions? Any last words of wisdom that either of you want to offer before I close this out? Dr. Gilbert White, would you like to share a few last words?
First, I'd like to just say thank you for the conversation and for the opportunity to share with you this evening. It is good to be in community and to have us to discuss this important matter and to share these important issues. But more importantly, it's key that we advocate in some form or fashion beyond, as you said earlier, the sound bites. You know, there's legislation that was mentioned last week. We were at a hearing for SB1, which is legislation to prevent people from experiencing homelessness when they are facing eviction by having representation. And so, you know, I urge each of you to, you know, look at what's happening in the state around policy and legislation to protect people in their housing and people without housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Benson? You got to unmute yourself. It's not letting you unmute yourself. Try this. Still no? There you go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
In closing for me, I would just, you know, I just get crossed up a little bit. In closing, landlords who chronically and intentionally keep residents in substandard housing conditions should not be allowed to operate in Sussex County. And that's where I am at as far as that goes. They should never, ever have, no one should never have to live where they're living. And the landlords, they should not be able to be renting any homes anywhere else once they are totally out of where they are as far as renting houses out to anyone. I'm trying to get myself to get this right here. What I'm trying to say is the landlord that is in Ellendale now, she should, once she's out of there, she should never be able to rent homes to anyone else. That's just, that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you. So we really appreciate you all taking the time. We know that time is precious. And I'm really grateful to our two speakers for sharing the rawness of their experience and sharing the pain of what they experience so that we can learn how to be better advocates. I put my name in my email in the chat. If you would like to be a housing advocate, please feel free to email me. I have an email listing of people who are willing to advocate when different bills come up in the Senate and in the House, and I'd be glad to add you to it. Next month, I am passing the baton over to Miss Melody Taylor. I am very excited. She is going to enlighten us. She's going to place Delaware within the context of the country as a whole. And she's going to tell us what housing instability looks like in our whole country, which will give us a little perspective on what's going on here in Delaware. And then in May, at that final one, that is really going to be about what we can do about it. That truly, to me, is the crux of every single one. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to make it better? Because if all we do is say, woe is me, how horrible this is, and don't do anything, then there has been no point to this series at all. The whole point of this series is that it leads us to work to make it better than it was and is. And so we're going to be looking at you to come back in April to hear about how it is, how Delaware fits in with the rest of the country. And then in May to hear about what we can do together. Thank you. And thank you again, Ms. Benson, Dr. Gilbert-Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.